Welcome to the Treasury Update podcast presented by Strategic Treasurer, your source for interesting Treasury news, analysis, and insights in your car, at the gym, or wherever you decide to tune in. On this episode of the podcast, host Craig Jeffery joins Lee-Ann Perkins, Assistant Treasurer at ION Geophysical, to discuss what Treasury professionals can do to prepare and manage through challenging times. They share profitable insights on how to design a treasurer map, a robust and tested plan to help navigate through uncharted waters while staying the course to meet fixed deliverables. Listen into the discussion to find out more.
Welcome to the Treasury Update podcast. This is Craig Jeffery, and I am joined by Lee-Ann Perkins again. She's the Assistant Treasurer at ION Geophysical, and this is our third podcast together since the inception of the Treasury Update podcast. Lee-Ann, thank you so much for joining us again.
Good morning, Craig, and thanks for having me again. You know how much I enjoy talking to you and talking about all things Treasury, so this is exciting for me.
You know, this idea of a treasure plan or a treasure map, as you've talked about, is something I'm looking forward to hearing in more detail after our planning session. But I think it'd be helpful for everyone to hear a little bit of background of what's going on with your organization in light of some of the different trying situations in the past, from hurricanes or pandemics or whatever. If you could provide some context and background for us to think about the discussion about planning.
ION is a company that's in the oil and gas services sector. So we have definitely had our fair share of crises in the past, some of them being around the oil industry collapse, so to speak, and some of them due to weather events. So we're headquartered in Houston, Texas. So we've had a number of difficult weather events over the last few years. Most recently, Hurricane Harvey. And I think that these have been difficult for the company, but being in the oil and gas industry, I think you learn resilience from an early stage in your career, and you realize that there's a lot of up and downs in the industry. So you have a lot to face. You know there's a lot of risk and challenges that will come your way. So not only do you have to prepare for the issues in the sector, but also these surrounding issues such as hurricanes or what we're facing now with this current pandemic. And right now, this is very much a human story. It's a very real strain of, there's a lot of illness, a lot of despair, and a lot of financial turmoil. So I think as we as a company and as team leaders grapple for solutions at work, we should also not forget about those people who are dealing with health tragedies and difficulties as they try to protect themselves and their families, as much as they really are putting in efforts to protect the work and the assets of the company.
Yeah, Lee-Ann, so when you mentioned Hurricane Harvey, and being in Houston, which is in the Gulf of Mexico, what was the type of issue that Hurricane Harvey brought about? Was it just because it disrupted your area or the entire, I'll call it the energy sector?
I think for us it was a little bit of both, but predominantly it was the area. We hadn't been working remotely out the office for such a long period of time with previous hurricanes or weather events. So when Harvey struck, it was, I think we all know from history, one of those hurricanes that just sat there and it just produced an enormous rainstorm. We had much flooding in the headquarters and the surrounding roads, so we couldn't get to work. So I think the most disruption that we faced was due to continuity of work. People were all of a sudden told, you can't come to the office because we had a major flooding in one of the inroads to the company. And so it was a lot of figuring out, how do we deal with the day-to-day work? How do we get payroll out? How do we make payments to our suppliers when some of our personnel working in the funding department didn't even have laptops? Everything was stuck at the office. So I think a lot of it had to do, at least from the Treasury perspective, had to do with how do we keep work going while making sure everyone's safe, because people were having to repair their houses. Some people had to relocate because the areas were just unmanageable and unlivable. So it was a lot of disruption to us. And of course, we have a manufacturing facility in Louisiana as well. So not only did Harvey impact Houston, but it impacted our manufacturing division as well. So it was very widespread, but I think we did a very good job in enacting our business continuity plan and learning from that as we went through the last 3 years to what we're currently having to implement now for the corona pandemic.
You use the treasure map and you use the acronym PLAN. Can you tell me what those categories are? What does the acronym stand for?
Sure. So this map was really designed to help me know where I am now and how to get to where I want to be for the Treasury Department. So I think you know me well enough now that I like to use acronyms. That just helps me to remember things. So it's PLAN stands for Prepare, Lead the Way, Agile, and Nerves of Steel. So that's how I really have put into place my roadmap and my strategic vision for the department in the 3 years that I've been with ION.
Great. So let's talk about the first letter, prepare. This idea of getting ready for whatever situations there are. I mean, I think that's part of the thinking from a risk perspective is what you're getting at there. But what do you need to prepare for? You've already mentioned, pandemic, oil shock, weather events. But tell us what kind of situations we need to be looking at.
This topic is more about a qualitative side of risk management. So with the preparation stage, to me, this is the philosophy of having an approach that's forward-looking. The preparation phase is really where I dedicate time to thinking about risks that can come up and trying to also formulate ideas to manage these risks. And I've always thought that risk management is the process of sending solutions down the road to meet you when you need them most.
I really like that. Sending solutions down the road. So it's like yeah, you have your playbook ready to use later. I like that. I like that phrasing. I'm sorry. Continue.
No problem. Yeah. And then, as part of my preparation too, I also like to think about what keeps the CFO up at night and identify those needs and then incorporate them into how I can manage the department's objectives to meet these needs. And as a Treasury department, I think everybody knows our life is ever changing. So we have regulatory changes, we have legal, financial, credit, business risks to prepare for. And then also on top of that, we have personnel changes. And recently, being in the oil industry, we had a reduction in force. So that meant some of the Treasury staff had to leave us. So you have to also prepare for those unforeseen circumstances, as well as when staff find different positions either in the company or with other companies. And you have to be able to have that continuity that the work still needs to be done. So there's a lot of risk that's inherent in this Treasury field. So if you're not preparing for it, I think you're going to have a hard time when uncertainty comes. And then I think also an important part for me as a team leader is to assess my team's strengths and skills beforehand. So I need to know what motivates them and also what demotivates them, what pushes their buttons. And I think this helps me because I can use my resources effectively. I can also know how to grow their abilities and opportunities. And also in terms of uncertainty, I will know how to best use skill sets when it's needed.
One of the things that you talked about when we were preparing for this podcast is you had mentioned layering your plan. What does this mean? And what are those layers if they're distinct layers on this plan?
Yeah. So for me, layering is really the process of aligning and preparing my goals to meet different objectives. And I like that saying, by failing to prepare, you're preparing to fail. So here, this plan and roadmap shows me again where I currently am and where I want to be. And I've previously mentioned in other podcasts that my overarching goal for the Treasury Department is maturity. And this is definitely going to span a few years. This is not just an easy project to install and meet the end goal. So I need to start with the strategic goal for the department, and this is really where I start to layer in risk management. And obviously this is going to be varied by company, but I think what's important to remember for anyone going through this process is that your goal should really not be to simply predict every situation and every possible black swan event that can come at you, but really to create an action plan that you can use if and when a crisis happens. And I think also the ideal starting point for developing a strategic plan for a department is to have a well thought out risk management framework and process. And then this now allows you to prepare your goals to align with the strategic goals of the company. And so an example for me in my company would be restructuring of bank accounts and relationships to allow for growth in new international markets. So that would be the second layer. And then in order to formalize the goals, I then have to break them down into many different tasks so we can accomplish the end goal. And so this really starts with planning tasks that allow you to meet your fixed deliverables and maintain stability. And that's more of your everyday goals and functions and transactional requirements that the department has to accomplish on a daily and weekly basis. But then one thing I will say with this whole layering process is that from what I've experienced in my past, I don't think you can be overly organized through a crisis. So if you can have a good solid plan, build in a side of flexibility and maybe a dose of creativity, then I think you have a good foundation and a basis to draw upon in times of difficulty.
Yeah, now you mentioned a couple types of resources, building out the plan, sending that information down the road. You talked about assessing your staff and making sure that they're prepared. What about other relationships? Well, it could be banks, it could be your software providers or consulting firms or legal assistants or whatever those are. What are those elements of the preparation part too?
Absolutely. And I think your network is one of the strongest attributes you can have to manage a department, because Treasury is a very forward-looking and a very far-reaching department. We deal with many people and many departments in the company, so we're not an island unto our own. So the networks have to be strong and they have to be there before you need them. So my partners are people who rally around me, who help me with ideas, who give suggestions, and wherever I can reciprocate, I do. But, those external relationships are crucial to helping you build your toolkit for when you need them. And that includes your bankers. And on my level as the assistant treasurer, I typically deal on the debt side with the bankers, and the C-suite typically deal with the equity owners. But having a good, strong relationships with my banks is incredibly important, and it's been true and proven over the crises that we faced in the past. And then, of course, the internal departments that we deal with, you can't do your treasury job without having a daily conversation with tax and with legal and with compliance, with finance and with AP and AR. So I think we're a department that really uses our resources well. We're there to help other departments through their needs just as much as they are through us. So I think you have to have valuable networks before you need them.
Yeah, thanks. So in working through the acronym, we've got P done for prepare, and the next one was lead the charge. Maybe give us an overview on what leading the charge means, either on a regular basis or in times of crisis, if there's any distinction there.
So I think, following on from preparation, the Treasury leader can either do their daily tasks or go into battle armed with your network that we've spoken about, your well-developed team members, your risk management framework, and your roadmap, so that you can know that you've laid a solid foundation for any upcoming challenges. And here, communication is going to be essential as you lead the charge, because it's your job as the leader to ensure that you are thoroughly communicating, you have repetitive communication and discussion of the roadmap, and the end goal. And you really have to set the example for the team. And I think also when you lead the charge, you have to be someone who's confident in where you're trying to go. Sometimes it's a little bit of faking that confidence, but your team and your company are watching you. They're relying on you to help you through either your daily work or a crisis that's coming at you. And I think this is also the part as a leader who has to take charge. You should be developing your non-technical skills as you progress along your career. And I think it's important because here you can differentiate yourself as a leader. You can increase the likelihood of progressing professionally. And also you'll probably meet your goals and make it through a challenge if you do that.
I think the third one you mentioned was Agile, this ability to adapt and change direction where needed. What does this Agile environment mean, or this Agile aspect mean when we're talking about the treasure map?
I think in order to be Agile, we need to be resilient. And this is sometimes difficult for team leaders because, with the demands that are placed on us, it's easy to get burnt out in this area. So the opposite of resilience is burnout. So as we progress in our careers, we need to make sure, as I've mentioned before, that the non-technical sides of our career are also being developed. You need to build up resilience so that it gives you the ability to adapt and the capacity to change when you need to. And I think it's important to manage your energy here because change is difficult. So you have to be able to delegate or remove those tasks that drain your energy or slow you down. And I think also being adaptable and willing to change helps you prevent trading on emotions when you're reacting to unpredictable events.
Pandemics, natural disasters, large times when there's a number of disruptive events happening, the plan you sent down the road may be helpful to some extent, but it may need to be adjusted. How do you know when you need to adapt or move off of the plan, or is it just something that the plan is open enough that you're operating within this envelope?
Yeah, so I think your plan does need to be flexible, but I think it's important that you need to learn how to fail fast. So if something is not working, don't spend extra time and energy and money chasing a goal that really isn't meeting the requirements. And some of these can be financial KPIs, such as an ROI, which we deal with in Treasury a lot. It can be a technical failure, or even just a task that's not beneficial. And this can sometimes be difficult because a lot of it is ego-driven. You're the one that sets the plan, you set the strategy and the direction, and if you have to abandon it, sometimes it's difficult because you spent a lot of energy and time thinking this through. But at the end of the day, you have to decide, do you want to be right or do you want to be effective? And so you also have to abandon your strategy if management tells you to, because of, structure follows strategy. So you have to listen to your management, follow where they're going, and make changes where necessary. And again, that comes back to having the characteristic of being agile. Sometimes you just have to make a change because you're told to.
Yeah, so when you're told to, that's probably easier. I guess the question I have, I don't know if this is actually an answerable question, is when do you know, how do you determine I'm successful because I push through, I see things through no matter how hard the going gets? And how do I know when is it time to abandon an approach or alter my course? I don't know if you have any guidance on that front.
I think it really depends on what the end goal is. And, sometimes you are a person who just knows that you're going to stick to your guns because this is something that's going to work, and not everybody has access to all the information that you do to know that this is going to eventually make it to the end goal. But other times it's just going to be, whatever the outcome is really something you have to follow your leaders on. And if it's unsafe or it's unethical, then don't do it. But if your management are in charge for a reason, so you have to follow them and follow their guidance. And I think you just sometimes it's a little bit of maturity as well, of knowing when to give up or when to change midstream.
Yeah, that's the hard decision point. But yeah, that's good. I like the discussion on Agile. So we come to N, which is nerves of steel. Is that part of being Agile? Or is that something different entirely?
No, I think it could be part of that too, because it's not easy to change. I mean, we all know that it's a difficult time we're living in. So change can be difficult, and it's also difficult to motivate yourself to keep going when you're having all these stresses on you and things are throwing at you sideways. But you have to know how to develop these characteristics and abilities to handle change and handle difficult times. And I think having nerves of steel is something that's needed in the Treasury Department, because you really have to be a person that is tenacious. Because dealing with even our everyday objectives and requirements can mean you're spending an inordinate amount of time on KYC or any type of activity with project management. So you have to really have that ability to just keep forging on. You have to be, I think, also someone who's naturally curious, because it's difficult to get through tough times sometimes. So you have to think about, how are you going to manage changing situations? How are you going to manage situations you've never been in before? So think outside the box, be creative, and be naturally curious for ideas. And then I think, again, it comes down to being a person who is resilient, and you have to have a risk management mindset and a very strong work ethic. And that will help to get you through some of the more trying times of your job.
Lee-Ann, I wanted to just do a quick cutaway. On one of the earlier podcasts, we talked about your forecasting and modeling activities, and you brought software in and have worked to do that. Can you give us a quick update on what that's, how that looked, and how you perhaps put that to use during reforecasting time during disruptive times that we've been through recently?
Yeah, so this project I am so excited about, and I'm so grateful and pleased to see that the preparation and the plan that was put in place 3 years ago has actually come into fruition. And this to me is really an example of plan the work and work the plan. I think the timing has just been perfect. So DataRails is a cloud-based solution for forecasting. So it's really been perfect for remote working that we're finding ourselves now in. It gives us the agility and the flexibility to get reports out to management on time. And what happened to us is, when Corona intersected with the oil crisis, we were asked to redo the plan for the year and to provide more frequent turns of our forecast and use longer time horizons. And this would have been very difficult if we were still using a manual system. So instead of my department having to use their time rekeying information, verifying numbers, validating information, we were able to get the information from the field. There's about 5 different business units who provide us information. So we received the information, we consolidated, and every time a different version came up, because this is a dynamically updating environment we're living in, all we had to do was reload the file. It would produce the information, and myself and my team could spend our time analyzing this information and looking to tell the story to executive management. And this happened to us the first time over the Easter weekend. So we were supposed to be off work on the Friday, and we got this request to make sure all the information was done by Monday morning. So there's a lot of people involved. It was a lot of work, but without this fabulous system, I don't think we would probably still be working on it. So I think it's a very valuable tool to use in not only ordinary times for us, but in extraordinary times where we're asked to do these projects more often.
Yeah, that ability to scale in times of crisis is sometimes forgotten during the typical even times. Well, let's get back to the topic of the treasure map now. Yeah, and as you move through the treasure map, this plan idea of preparing, leading the charge, being agile, having nerves of steel. What's the loop here? The feedback loop. A postmortem after a particular event or review after a period of time. What do you do with that to make sure that your next plan, or as you learn from experiences, how do you improve your plan?
Yeah, so I think, once the dust settles, your next step should always be to close the loop, and that is to review and capture lessons learned. And that's always going to be an input to your risk register. But, again, this is not an easy time often, because here you're going to have to relive any mistakes that were made. You're going to have to relive choices not taken or the wrong choices taken. And a lot of the times you have your weaknesses identified and exposed. And this can be difficult if you as the team leader are upfront and you're having to admit to and have your weaknesses identified. But this is also a time for maturity. So it's not only for your own growth and to develop personally and professionally, but it's also for the team's sake. And I think this is a very crucial step that you don't want to forget to do. So I prioritize it as part of the initial preparation stage in my plan, because I know it has to be done, although it's not my favorite thing to do.
Yeah, that post-mortem is sometimes sometimes a challenge. Now, once the crisis is passed, what are some other things you do besides the post-mortem? How do you extend that beyond your immediate team or employee group?
Yeah, so talking about exiting from a financial crisis or a recession or something that we're in right now, you're often going to find an increased demand for cash. So I think leaders and teams need to focus on projects that still benefit from optimization and efficiency. And again, you have to focus on preserving cash and protecting liquidity. And then I think really importantly for me is that you're going to find that Treasury professionals are often asked to do things outside of their field. And this is because, they're often very skilled, they have a lot of abilities. But now, after a crisis, it's time to ensure that their skills are redirected back to the core deliverables. And because you do this because you want to make sure the Treasury goals get back on track. And importantly, your staff is then allowed to get re-energized by the work that drew them into the Treasury Department in the first place. In your lessons learned, you're going to need to discuss them and implement where appropriate. And so for me, this would be updating the business continuity plan we currently have.
Yes, a lot of people have been doing that since COVID became a bigger reality for what we did and how we responded. I like that.
Communication here at this stage is also key. And this is the time where you really want to be genuine and express gratitude for all those who've helped you through a crisis. And a kind word and a gesture really go a long way to showing you appreciate mutually beneficial relationships. And during this time of COVID, this is going to include our customers, because they kept receivables flowing in spite of their own difficulties. And definitely my bankers, they provided valuable solutions and advice and help whenever I needed it. And also the vendors, they bent over backwards to help us with payment plans and discounts. And, that also includes your technology providers who were there for you, keeping systems running when we all started remote working. So, being genuinely thankful to those people is a good step to build into your plan as well. And then I also think, obviously you want to thank your team members, because we've all had to put in a lot of extra hours and efforts to get things done. We've still had quarter close we've just completed. We have SOX controls, we have audits. So there's a lot of work that's gone on behind the scenes that your team members, mine especially, have just risen to the challenge. And here I want to throw in also IT, because if it wasn't for them, I would probably still be working on paper with a pen. So I always have to thank them for their extra help. They always lend an extra hand, and they provide encouragement when it's most needed. But I think a step for me that's often forgotten is a thanks to our executive management and leaders, because they are often shielding us from things that we don't know what's happening. We're so introspective with our own issues and our own individual departments. We're worried about our own jobs. We're worried about getting everything done, funding, making sure payroll gets out. And we really don't realize what they're going through at the same time. We're not walking in their shoes, so we're not particularly attuned to the stresses and difficulties they're facing. And I think about it sometimes like children and parents. We, as children, often complain that our parents don't do stuff for us or give us stuff, but we're not even realizing the sacrifices that they're making. So I think this is a step that I want to try to build into my future, that I'm reminded of other people who are struggling and just protecting us and helping us keep our jobs as well.
Any final thoughts on the treasurer map?
I think it's good practice to have a roadmap. I think it's helped me in the past. I've been able to see in the last 3 years that I've been at the company, I've been able to see some of our projects demonstrate that really success occurs where opportunity meets preparation. So I think it's a good idea to have a plan, to know where you're going and know how to get there and what steps you can take to achieve those goals for your departments.
That's a great way to look at it. Lee-Ann, thank you so much for your time on today's podcast.
You're welcome. And you know that I have a great passion for my chosen Treasury profession, and I hope that all who listen to this can find it useful and enjoyable and find value in their work as much as I do.
You've reached the end of another episode of the Treasury Update podcast. Be sure to follow Strategic Treasurer on LinkedIn. Just search for Strategic Treasurer. This podcast is provided for informational purposes only, and statements made by Strategic Treasurer LLC on this podcast are not intended as legal, business, consulting, or tax advice. For more information, visit and bookmark strategictreasurer.com.